The Rebel Capitalist Show.
I've got three takeaways here. But number one, you've got that, I think investors need to think about that jurisdictional risk we're talking about. Number two, they need to really pay attention to the narrative, not just within the country, but within the corporation itself. Because you gave the example of Shell Oil. Now, you may be someone who's wildly bullish on oil, but you're not going to touch Shell with a 10-foot pole because they're trying to divest themselves of all of the things that are making them money right now. They're trying to get rid of all the oil assets they have and buy wind and solar. So you've got to pay even more attention to the business itself. And if they're drinking the Klaus Kool-Aid, let's say, then you've got the jurisdictional risk. That's two things right there that investors need to pay more attention to than they probably are right now. You can't just go out and buy a random ETF because you're bullish oil. Number three is usually the cure for high prices are high prices. Because what happens, that price gets up, the higher the price goes, it attracts more investment, which creates more supply, which brings the price back down to some sort of equilibrium point when it gets in, when it equals up with the demand side of the equation. But now what you're saying is, especially with oil, because there's not going to be any capital going into oil because of this ESG movement, or a lot less, that we could be heading into a super cycle where the cure for high prices are not high prices, that the high prices just continue to go up because we're not allowing, or the governments are not allowing the cure, which would be more capital investment, to take place, and they're not allowing more supply to hit the market. So even if demand does decrease because people are favoring Teslas, let's say, it's still not going to overpower the supply decrease because of the lack of capital investment that we've had over the last 3 years and that we will have into the future. I think those are like kind of the three main takeaways from the last 10 minutes. Am I correct there, Chris?
Yeah, there's one thing I'd just like to add to it. So if you think about the USSR, they had massive productivity declines. You had higher prices, but it didn't bring on more supply. Why? Because there was no incentive. There's no meritocracy. There wasn't the ability for any individual to profit from or have their life become better by taking the actions to bring about that additional supply.
Right.
And so there was no more supply.
No animal spirits. No animal spirits.
Yep. So we're seeing that component. Now, what happens is, I think there's a very good test case here, which is Germany. In 2014, Germany decided they're going down this renewables path. That's when they began. So they've gotten rid of their coal, they've gotten rid of their nuclear. By the way, they have a whole lot of lignite, which is fucking awful stuff. But the largely what's taken place is their cost of electricity is ramped up, and they have now the highest cost of electricity in all of Europe. Their carbon emissions have not gone down, by the way, but facts don't matter in an ideology. And they have now taken what was energy security and they've made it energy insecurity. So they are now under the thumb of Putin, which is the natural gas. Their other component of energy that they get is from France, which is nuclear. And the French and the Germans haven't always been friends. And the other one is Poland, which is coal. And so they've lost they've lost energy security. And with energy security, as I've always said, you have political security. So while you're getting this divergence in the world, those countries that are controlling that energy supply they will exert more and more influence over the others. It's going to happen. It's China is going to become much, much more aggressive, militarily wise, economically wise, because they're going to have the ability to do that. If you look at the One Belt, One Road initiative, that whole componentry is all around infrastructure and energy and trade lanes.
Right.
And those people who control the trade lanes ultimately, actually, typically have the world reserve currency. because you've got to pay seigniorage to use the trade lanes.
Yeah.
And so they can dictate what that gets paid in. They're not going to get paid in dollars.
And you think that's where the digital yuan comes into play?
I think so.
Yeah.
So One Belt, One Road is an initiative towards their currency becoming the world's reserve currency.
Right.
So and they're trying to do that on a technological front, right? Which is Huawei and 5G and satellites. And they're trying to do it on the trade routes, which is all of the ports that they now own and control. And the belt or the road, should we say, the old road. So in that respect, you've got the old Silk Road. And if you look, it's Middle East, it's through the Stans, it's Turkey, and they've got railroads and everything.
Goes down to Africa as well.
Yeah. So all of that they're building, and none of that happens without fossil fuels, none of it. And they're spending and investing heavily in the ability for them to bring that to fruition, because they're going to own those routes and they're going to have seigniorage on who pays to use them, which will give them that domination in world reserve currency. We're not there yet, but that's what's being developed. Now, you'd look at that and go, well, maybe they're going to get there in 30, 40 years' time. I would say that would be true if it weren't for the fact that the West is literally stepping off a cliff. I mean, so you got one side that's just doing this crazy, they're doing everything they can possibly do to commit suicide, economically, politically, financially, socially. All that China really actually needs to do is just stand still, unfortunately. So as that's all taking place, again, you come back to the investments, it's important to actually look at the jurisdiction of your assets. And I'm not saying don't go and buy a company that's listed on the TSX. You got to look at where's the company's head offices. They might be in Montreal or in Toronto or something. That's not necessarily a problem, provided that their assets are outside. If their assets are in Guyana, or if they're in Azerbaijan or something like that, if there's pressures that come from the state government to say, you shouldn't be doing gold mining or oil refining or whatever the particular business is, what'll happen is the same thing that happened in South Africa, my original home, which is that they'll say, okay, we're out of here. And they'll simply sell those assets to a new corporate entity that happens to then get listed in Shanghai or Hong Kong or Moscow or Warsaw, and the capital shifts. That's how you get capital flows. NASDAQ came out with, you can't have a listing unless you have, is it a black member on your board and a woman, and like this
or woke,
critical race theory
nonsense
kind of stuff,
right,
pushing into NASDAQ. So
right,
what happens? Well, now if you want to list on NASDAQ, yes, you want the capital, it's got big capital markets, but this is now the element which makes it less attractive. So we're going to just see this shift, because ultimately people will go, the hell with that, I'm just going to go and list in Shanghai.
Right.
Capital shift. So how do you get to a digital yuan? That's the world reserve currency. This is how. This is how.
Yeah, that's how you're looking at kind of the global macro and how you are allocating capital. And you're someone that has allocated capital professionally for the last at least 2 or 3 decades, at least 2 decades. And so that's kind of your top-down approach. Number one, you look at these countries that don't want to play ball with the World Economic Forum's narrative. You're looking at the jurisdictions, then you're looking at the individual countries and kind of, how they're playing the game. And then you're trying to base your probabilities on which countries are going to set up these networks with one another that are going to be friendly to capital. And that's where you're trying to do more and more homework to try to find those individual companies that are quote unquote cheap and you think have good risk reward.
100%.